see we have some that braved the day. We are in the book of Romans. We are doing a series as we've gone through it. We are at chapter 7. And this evening we're going to be looking at verses 7 through 12, talking about sin's advantage in the law and referencing how because of the law we understand what sin is. That's basically the premise of where Paul's going right now, because he's trying to get not only the Jews to understand it, but he's trying to get the Gentiles to realize just because there was the law doesn't mean we're bound by that law, but we know that we have sin and we all have sinned because the law teaches us what sin is. And so in this, he's giving them a great understanding of who they are and where they need to be. And so in this lesson this evening, we're going to look at this idea and understanding, and we're going to draw some points from it that hopefully will help us as we go through and we look at it to be able to pinpoint and understand exactly what sin does to us and why the law could not save people the way that it was expected to or the way that people thought it would. It just couldn't do that. Read with me, starting in verse 7 of Romans chapter 7. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? Certainly not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin except through the law. For I would not have known covetousness unless the law had said, you shall not covet. But sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, proceeded in me all manner of evil desire. For apart from the law, sin was dead. I was alive once without the law. But when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. And the commandment, which was to bring life, I found to bring death. For sin, taking occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it killed me. Therefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy, and just, and good. Here's the whole of it. The question that has to be answered, the question that needs to be asked and answered is the law of Moses wrong? Because it taught sin. What do I mean by that? Well, Paul goes into this as we get into our lesson. You're going to note in verse 7, he's going to bring this concept out. The law is not sin, but it taught me sin. And so you see it right there, boom, the first thing, he gives understanding. I wouldn't have known what covetousness was if the law had not said, do not covet. How can we know what sin is if we're not taught? That's why it's so important for us to understand. I hear people occasionally will tell me, oh, well, we're born into sin. You're not born into something, you learn something. Why do we have racial tension in our societies today? I can answer that question. We have racial tensions in our society today because people are taught racial tension. They're taught how to be or how not to be, or they're taught all of these accesses and all these other things. How are we taught what adultery is? We're told don't commit adultery. But what is adultery? Well, we learn these things as we grow. That's why, as a child, when we are born, we're not born with sin. We don't have sin. We learn what sin is. And because of that, we get to a point in our life where we realize right from wrong, and we realize we need salvation because we can't do it. We've got sin now. We are now separated from God, and because of that, we need the salvation Christ brought. This is where Paul's going with it. The law taught what sin was. As a baby, he didn't have to worry about it, but it taught it, and he learned it. And because he learned it, he now had an issue. It now brought death, because what happens when sin enters into the world? Death comes with it. How do we know this? Well, go back to the book of Genesis. It teaches us right there in Genesis chapter 3, that same concept. Oh, well, you won't surely die. But when they ate of the fruit that they were forbidden of, it says their eyes were open and they knew right from wrong. Their innocence was gone. They didn't know what sin was, and then all of a sudden they did. We grow to a point in our life, we don't understand it, we don't know what it is, but we're taught. I'll give you a case in point. A child growing up lies to his parents. He doesn't know he's lied to his parents until his parents teach him that what he did was lie to them. Well, Mom, I didn't do that. Knowing he did, he still lied. And Mom takes and makes that moment, and she teaches her son what a lie is. By the way, a lie is anything said to deceive someone. It may be chock full of truth, but if it's designed to deceive someone, it's a lie. And because of that, we have to be careful. We are taught these things. And that's where Paul comes from in verse 7. In verses 8 and 9, he said, because the law had this idea, because it taught us what sin was, sin took opportunity through the law. In other words, what sin did was it said, you're going to teach it, I'm going to demonstrate it. I'm going to make them want it. And so we see a person, maybe he's in a situation where there's a $20 bill laying on the table. Now, you just watch somebody lay it there, and they're standing there talking to somebody, but they laid it down. Maybe they didn't realize they laid it down. He picks it up, and he puts it in his pocket and walks away. Had one time, I was working and saw somebody reach into their pocket, and they pulled some money out to pay for some stuff, and a $20 bill fell to the ground. Now, I saw who did it. I saw who lost that $20. Now, I had a choice at this moment. I could, one, pick up the $20 and pocket it and say, finders keepers, Bubba. Or two, I could walk up and return that $20. I'll let you figure out what I did. Had another situation where a child came in, well, I say a child, a teenager came in with his friends. And as they had gotten their food and they had sat down and they were eating, one of the girls came up and said, hey, this was on the floor. I don't know who it belongs to. Well, there was only 3 people that had just come through the line. So I said, I'll take care of it. And she handed it to me, and I walked over and I said, can any of y'all tell me if y'all dropped some money? And one of the girls reached into her pocket and she says, no, my money's here. Another girl reached in and she said, no, my money's here. And the boy reached into his pocket and he went, I don't have my 20. I handed it to him because it was a $20 bill that was laying on the ground. He knew the exact amount that he had lost out of his pocket. Now, I could have taken that $20. The girl that gave it to me could have taken that $20. But if we know who it is, then we're stealing. Why is it stealing? Because the law said if we take something that does not belong to us, it's stealing. So now we know what stealing is. And so because of that, sin has opportunity in the law to deceive us and to cause us to do the things we don't want to do. Look at James as James is talking about sin. He says you're drawn away by your own lust and enticed, which teaches me and gives me understanding that it's not Satan that did it, it's me. What I wanted. And so how did I get to that point? I learned those things. And sin takes opportunity in the law to deceive and to cause people to want to, makes it look a lot better. Let me ask you this. If you go to the store and you get some fruit, you go home and you display that fruit in a basket like, you know, it looks really nice. I love going into some people's homes. They've got those fruit baskets sitting there on their table, and they got all sorts of nice stuff, and it looks really good, and it looks inviting, and of course they say, hey, if you want a piece, grab it, and you know, what do you pick up? Do you pick up a piece that doesn't look so good? Maybe it's a little tarnished, or do you go for that one that's nice and shiny? You know that the minute you bite into it, it's going to be juicy. That's what sin does. it entices us more of what we already want. And that's why Paul can say in verses 8 and 9 that sin took opportunity in the law, because that's what it did. And then in verse 10, he says, the command that brought life, he found death in. Why do I say that? Why does Paul write it that way? Well, the law was supposed to bring life. It was supposed to bring people closer to God. It was supposed to bring them into a connection, into a relationship with God, so that they could have what they needed, so that they could be what they needed to be. But the problem was, man took opportunity and kind of started changing things. Here's the way one of those worked. You were only supposed to go so far on the Sabbath. Well, why is that? Because man said, well, you can only go so far, right? Because Jesus obviously said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so they couldn't read and say, oh, well, okay, I just had a member of my family pass away, and I got to get to the family, and that means I'm going to have to travel on the Sabbath. God will understand. They didn't look at it that way. So what they would do is they started extending things. They would bring parts of their home with them, and they would drop it at a certain point, and then they'd go a little further and they'd drop it up because they brought their home with them. So they're still within that. Really? You're going to try to cheat God that way? That's where we're trying to make the man for Sabbath rather than Sabbath for man, because we're making rules where rules don't exist. God always intended for Jesus Christ to die on the cross. Now, he established, so that the sins could be taken care of in the year, he established what's called the scapegoat concept, where they would sacrifice an animal, pour the blood on the goat, set the goat out into the wilderness, and boom, there you go. Now we got to wait till the next year. We would constantly call that rolling the sins over to the next year. Although that's not what it's called. That's not what we see. We don't see those words used in that statement, but that's how we describe it. Because the blood of bulls and goats could not save. It could not forgive sin. But the blood of Christ could. And so that life that the commandment was supposed to bring, actually they found death in, because the more they tried to do the will that God set forth, the more they found themselves having issues in their own life. Because what is the flesh? The flesh is sinful. And the flesh goes after what the flesh wants. And it does what it wants to do. And it goes against God's will and God's commandment. And so what we see that although God brought life, he wanted them to have a full, abundant life in him, they still found ways to bring sin into it because of the life they lived rather than in the things that God did. And so that brings us to verses 11 and 12, where sin took occasion in the law. And that's exactly what it did. Sin comes in and it sets up camp. You ever really read the parable of the prodigal son? How many have really seen and understood? Don't show me your hands, please. How many of us have really seen and understood the prodigal son? Because here's what the prodigal son teaches us. You ready? It teaches us that sin will take us too far, will cost us too much. That's what it teaches us. It'll take us too far, and it'll cost us too much. Think about this. The son goes into a foreign country. He went so far away from his dad, he didn't have to worry about it. But then what did he end up doing? He ended up spending his money in riotous living. And so we see what sin does. And then once it was all gone, and sin had stripped him of everything he had, here he is in this foreign land. He's hungry. He's destitute. He has absolutely nothing. And what does he end up having to do? He comes back home, and he comes back home to grovel. But his father has mercy on him. Did his father have to accept him back into his house? Nope. He didn't have to. His father didn't have to put a robe on him. Didn't have to put the signet ring on him. Didn't have to put sandals on his feet. All of that shows royalty, by the way. He didn't have to do it, but he did. He didn't have to kill the fatted calf, but he did. He had mercy on him. In fact, what's so amazing to me, those of you that have had children, I know y'all probably done things to the similar effect, not quite to this extent. This son of his has traveled to a far country, and it says while he was still a distance off, his father saw him. You know what that teaches me? He was looking for him. He was looking for it. He knew it was going to happen. He was looking for him, and when he saw him, he didn't wait for his son to come to him. He ran to his son, he kissed him on the neck and cheek, and he welcomed him back into the house. Sin took occasion in the law, and because it took occasion in the law, sin took the people too far and cost them everything. What do you mean by that? Well, did Israel not rebel against God and follow after idols and other things? They did. Did sin not cost them their kingdom? It did. In fact, it's during the time that we find that they were taken away. They were incorporated throughout the kingdom of Babylon. And they're finally going to be allowed to come home. And the first thing they have to do is build two things. Number one, the gate to the city. They had to establish the walls around Jerusalem. Number two, they had to build the house of God. Malachi deals with them building the house of God. Because he tells them, he says, look, y'all come home and y'all built your own houses and you have left mine in despair. And I'm telling you this, you bring it in, are you going to rob God? Bring it to the house and see if I don't bless you where your cup overflows. He's letting them know right now, I see what you're doing. You're more concerned, and this is what happened the first time, you're more concerned about your own self, and you're not concerned about my stuff. Sin. Look at the church today. We're more concerned about us than we are about God's things. Whoa, preacher, now you're stepping on toes. Am I? Because if I'm stepping on our toes, then that means we needed it. Because here's the case that we really need to understand about what God has done. God has given us everything. God has given us life. He's given us salvation. He's given us a place to stay. He's given us everything we need for life and godliness. He's given it all. What have we done to deserve it? What have we done to earn it? Absolutely nothing. And yet we still, in the church today, tell God what we want rather than listening to what God desires. That's what we've always done. It's what man has done from the beginning, telling God what he wants instead of listening to God. And if you and I want to do what's right, we want to be what God needs us to be, we want to live the life that God wants us to live, we've got to put aside our selfishness and cling to his righteousness and know that he is God and get away from allowing sin to take opportunity in our lives and allow us to be what God needs. And I ask you this evening, where are you? Where are you this evening when it comes to God? Because that's the key. It's up to you on what you're going to do. But if you need to become a child of God, or if you need to get your life right because you're not a child of God, I plead with you, let us help. Do something about it this very moment. Step out and come forward while together we stand and sing this invitation song.
Why?